today's topic choice, the title itself, as you guys can read, is GPA, SAT, academic achievement, and extracurriculars. The first kind of thing I want to talk about is what matters more. Obviously, there are a variety of different things that go into an undergraduate application, and I'm sure that when you are in the process of having to kind of tackle all of these different things and make sure you have all these different things covered, that you wrote all your essays, that you took all the tests that you have to take, that you sent off all your transcripts that you have to send off. I know it can probably be a little bit challenging, maybe even overwhelming at points, just because it can seem like a lot of different things. But hopefully after this, you can kind of see that it's not so overwhelming and that it's actually quite easy. And hopefully I provide you with some tips and pointers to how to go about the process to make it as easy as possible for you. As I mentioned, there was just 4 basic kind of things that we were looking at, which was the GPA, SAT, academic achievement, and extracurricular activities. So what I did for the purpose of this was I broke them down into 2 primary categories for you guys to better understand them and to better visualize these things. So the first and the left-hand side, which you can see are technical, is the technical category. So the technical category, the reason I labeled it this was because it's largely viewed as black and white. So something like a grade point average, it's a number. So you can't really interpret a number in very many different ways because a lot of times your grade point average is out of a number. So like say in the US, the common grade point average is 4.0. So if I have a 3.9 out of a 4.0, the admissions committee can already tell kind of how I perform academically and such. And so there isn't a lot of interpretation that goes into that process because they understand already based on the number what kind of student I am. And so things like grade point average and SAT scores, individual course grades, and rank. So anything that really deals with a number, so something that I can put into an empirical format or into quantitative format is always going to fall into the technical side. And then on the flip side, we have the qualitative section. So the qualitative section is not necessarily black or white. And that's just to say that these are things that you that largely are telling your story or things you're doing that cannot just be giving a numerical value. So for example, an academic achievement or an extracurricular activity that you devote a lot of your time to, if I'm somebody who's sitting on the admissions committee and I'm looking over your application and I see all the extracurricular activities you did, it's really difficult for me to just say, okay, this person gets a score 3 out of 5 for their extracurricular activities, because extracurricular activities in nature are subjective, and so they're very specific to each individual applicant. Because a lot of times people devote their free time to a variety of different things. And so candidate A might not devote the same thing, his time or her time, to the same things as candidate B. And so that's something to take into account, is that don't worry or don't feel like you have to have specific extracurricular activities that are going to make you a competitive applicant. You don't need to have some kind of formula of the exact type of extracurricular activities. Instead, you should find things that you're passionate about and that really deal with what help tell your story and what you're motivated about. So they should be specific things to you and to your goals, not specific to what you think is going to get you necessarily into the program. Because a lot of times admissions teams and admissions committees, they can see that and they understand that sometimes people just try to put what they think looks good rather than what they actually are passionate about. But the qualitative side in general, like I said, is something that you have a little bit more wiggle room on, because it gives you the opportunity to tell your story through an essay, through recommendation letters, through those extracurriculars, what you're devoting your time to. That speaks to your ability as a student outside of academia. So a lot of times the admissions teams, they want to know who you are as a person, not just as a student. Because let's face it, when you're at university, there's a lot of things you're doing. You're not just sitting in a classroom. Maybe you're taking up leadership roles in an organization. Maybe you're working an on-campus job. Maybe you're joining a fraternity or sorority. So there's a lot of different social, academic, and professional aspects that go into this. And so they want to see somebody who really knows what they're doing and is able to apply themselves. And that is why, for the point of this Venn diagram that you guys see right now, you can see that there's the middle section that I have kind of tried to put some lines through, because this is where you want to be. So you don't want to be too far on the left and you don't want to be too far on the right. And what we call this middle section is a student who is well-rounded. Well-rounded basically means that you're able to wear multiple hats, you're able to do multiple things, and you're skilled at a variety of different things. You don't just concentrate all of your time on one item, because admissions teams don't want to see that. They don't want to see somebody who just studies 100% of their time and that's it. That's not an interesting candidate to them, because what would they do outside of the classroom? Nothing. Well, then maybe that's not necessarily the student they want. And so you guys, each of you, when you're thinking about your applications, what I want you guys to think about is, do you have a good mix of a variety of different technical and qualitative quantities in your application? Because that is something that they do want to see, and that is something that they will prioritize. Although maybe sometimes there's this misconception that if you rank amazing on the left, then you don't really have to worry about the right. But that isn't necessarily true, especially for really like top name schools or Ivy League schools or really competitive programs. They want to see individuals who have both of these categories under their belt. And so that is just something for you guys to keep in mind when you are crafting your application. Now to kind of just really focus on first the technical requirements, so you guys can better understand these and how maybe admissions teams look at these. The first thing that I discussed was the grade point average. So in the US, it is common for a grade point average to be out of a 4.0. So that means that all of our grades, whatever we get, they're translated onto a scale, with 4 being the highest number you can possibly get. So normally on a transcript as well, when admissions teams are looking at your grade point average, it tells them what's the highest score you can get in a class anyways. So when they see your average, the average of all your grades, they can tell, okay, well, this person normally got a lot of A's, or I guess in your case, 4s and 5s. And so this is somebody who's a good student. But what I was going to say about the grade point average, and something for you guys to note, is a lot of times in the US, students take different type of coursework during high school. So we can take not just your standard mathematics course, but we can take an upper level, or what we call advanced mathematics course. So it's still the same mathematics course, but the degree of difficulty is much higher. I don't know, again, I don't know in your case if you guys have these types of classes, but what I'm trying to recommend for you guys is, if you take a specific class that was more difficult and was not required for you to take, or if you took a higher level class of mathematics, science, whatever class it is, maybe some humanities style class, that is something also to highlight, because maybe that's why you also got a low grade, or you got a mediocre grade, because the degree of difficulty was higher. And admissions teams do look at that. So in the US, like for a US applicant, if you take all advanced courses instead of the standard courses, but you got medium grades, and so your GPA is technically a little bit lower than somebody who took all the standard courses, so not advanced courses, and got perfect scores, they balance those out because they understand that this second applicant challenged him or herself by taking more advanced coursework that was much more difficult and much more rigorous. So that is also something to take into account when you are making your application. If you're worried about a certain grade because the class was really hard, admissions teams will see that, and you can also choose to maybe even highlight that challenge and show that you continuously worked harder and harder to get a better and better grade in that class. SAT and ACT scores are pretty straightforward. Again, like I said, a lot of these technical requirements are black and white. So the SAT score, they're going to see not only the score you get, and I don't think necessarily just the score here is important. One thing that I've realized, because I'm getting ready to apply now for graduate programs, and now looking back at my time when I was a high school student, one of the more important things for your SAT exam or test when you get the results back is the percentile that you get out of, like, higher than students. So when you get an SAT, your SAT score, it gives you your overall score, but then it also gives you what percentage of students you scored higher than. And I think that is something important for you guys to realize, because you need to know that a lot of times the admissions teams probably look more at how many, what percentile of students you scored higher than what your actual score is. Because as you guys already know, the tests are not the same every single time. And so one test can actually be more difficult than another. And so if you scored lower, let's say on the second test you took, but your percentile of how many, like you scored a higher percentile than you did your first test, where you got maybe a higher score but a lower percentile, your second test might be actually more effective because you scored on a higher percentile of students. And that's what they really want to see, is because they're not just looking just at your score, they're comparing your score to other students who took a similar test and how that compares. And so that is something to keep in mind as well. So don't be so focused just on the score, but also understand that your percentile matters just as much, if not a little bit more. Now, somebody obviously asked the question, what if my school doesn't have an academic rank or percentile? And like I mentioned, If it doesn't have one, don't worry about it. Just let the admissions team know, and they will tell you what steps you should take to kind of work around that or how you can go about that. But again, the reason for an academic rank is really just to understand how you and your school compare to other students, because maybe your school is giving everybody perfect scores. And so if everybody has a 4.0 and everybody's ranked number one, then maybe something's wrong, you know? And so it helps admission teams just understand better, how does this specific candidate slash student compare to other people who went through the same kind of coursework. And again, percentile. So I think percentile is something you guys should definitely be aware of, because percentile is a really effective tool for admissions teams to understand how you comparatively perform as an undergraduate, or how you will perform essentially as a future undergraduate student. So then the qualitative requirements. For the qualitative requirements, like I said, so these are not black and white. These are more things that are viewed like it's hard to put a number on. And so these have more of a like wiggle room for you, because you can sway the admissions team a little bit more. Whether that's through an essay that you write, oftentimes an essay that we often see in admissions applications is a personal statement, or maybe they want you to write an essay about some challenge that you faced or whatnot. But there are a variety of different things that make up the qualitative section, as you guys can see, and they're not just limited to these 4 things. But I think these 4 things are most often what you see on the requirements or the optional list. And before I begin getting into any of these, I do just want to know, if you're worried about getting into a school and you see that they have a lot of optional requirements to the application that you can submit. So let's say that they have all 4 of these items right here. So an essay, a letter of recommendation, you listing all your extracurricular activities, your academic achievements. They give you an option, 4 options to put each one of these into your application. Even though it's optional, I recommend for you guys to do it every single time. Why? Because probably 8 times out of 10, most candidates who think that they're just a safe candidate will just do the basic minimum because that's all they want to do and they think that they'll get in. But if you do all the optional requirements as well, it already makes you stand out as a candidate, because that shows the admissions team that you take this seriously, and that an admissions letter or an acceptance really is important to you. And so something like doing the essay and getting a letter of recommendation shows them that, okay, this student really did all the things that were required of him or her. Now looking at the individual categories, academic achievement. So what makes up an academic achievement? What is it? Should I list it? Should I not list it? I always say, in general, for any kind of academic achievements, even if you don't think it's so important, it's always better to be on the safe side and list it. Why? Because maybe somebody can recognize it, or maybe somebody sees it and says, okay, well, that still shows that they are active academically and that their activities have been recognized by their own school or whatever it may be. What I was going to say was, so for academic achievements, I know in Kazakhstan, I believe you guys have something called the Olympiad. Things like that really constitutes an academic achievement. So because if you score high and you place high in that, that is obviously something where you get an award, you get a medal, or you get some form of recognition for your achievement. And I believe those types of things like the Olympiad are not normally required, but if you do them, you're doing them outside of the normal school hours, or maybe during the school hours. I don't know when they do them, but nonetheless, they're not always required of you. And so showing that you have academic achievements outside of just the normal classroom is really good. Other academic achievements can be, let's say, like a lot of times in the US, we have something called the science fair. If you got recognition for some project that you did, maybe a research project, a science project that you did with a few other classmates, and it was recognized as one of the best projects in the school, that is something to put on your application, because it speaks to your ability as a student. And so those types of things are really important because they highlight the different things that you have done throughout your time in high school. And I mean, high school is long. High school is 4 years, so you normally have a lot of time to hopefully build up a few achievements during that time. And so, like I said, if you are ever uncertain about whether you should include one or not, always include it, just because it's better to have it than not to have it. Because you never know, maybe in the end, that's the deciding factor between 2 equally qualified candidates is, okay, well, this candidate has a few more academic achievements, so maybe we should go with her instead of this candidate because he doesn't have so many. So that's just a tip for you guys, is always stay on the safer side and include as many things as you can, because it shows that you've done a lot more. Extracurricular activities is even more broader, is much broader than academic achievements because this can really mean anything. Extracurricular activities are not only things that are done through your school. They can be things that you do completely on your own time, unrelated to school as well. Let's say somebody is really into music where they play an instrument, but they play it on their free time and they have private lessons. That is something to highlight. That shows a lot of ability, not just in terms of music, but also that shows ability for you to be able to get involved on campus, on this university's campus. And so that's something that they like because then they think, okay, this student might join a music-based organization. We want to see that. It can also be a job maybe that you had. I know when I was in high school, I worked at a store called American Eagle, and it was a retail-based store, so I sold clothes. That's an extracurricular activity because that's something that I did on my own time. And that shows the admissions team that I wasn't just outside of my, like on my free time, I wasn't just sitting around all the time, not wanting to do anything. That instead, I was action driven and I took initiative to do a variety of different things. So extracurricular activities, really the list is really long, so I'm not going to list all of them because otherwise it would take the whole time. But things like music, sports, a job that you have, any organizations, school organizations, maybe you started a club, all of those things count. So that's something that you should include. Volunteering, exactly, perfect. So volunteering, like if you volunteered at a local hospital, I did that. I volunteered at a nursing home for elderly people. There are different things that you can do there are different things that you can do that constitute extracurricular activity. Now, these last two, these aren't things necessarily that you have to spend a lot of time doing in the sense that essays, you can always write an essay. You don't need to have done an organization for 4 years to be able to write an essay. And same thing for letters of recommendation. So an essay normally is what we call a personal statement. That's a lot of times what you'll see. Or like I said, it's something kind of around the idea of what challenges you faced as an undergraduate student, or as a high school student, sorry. And these essays are really important sometimes because it gives the admissions team an idea of who you are and how you accomplished everything that you did. So let's say, for example, you had to work because maybe your family was low income, and so you needed to work outside of school to make some extra money so that you could help your family out. They want to know things like that. They want to know if maybe you experienced some hardship, maybe somebody close in your family passed away, maybe something big happened that really impacted your life and impacted your ability to be a student in a good way or a bad way. They want to know all of those things because that tells your story. And that's really what your application is it's your personal story. Whether it's your grades, your academic achievements, your essays, all of those things are telling your story. And so that's something that you just got to keep in mind is if you've experienced a challenge, in terms of an application, that's a good thing. Why? Because it gives you more to your story and it lets admissions teams know what kind of things did you have to overcome to get to where you are today. And it shows them that you're perseverant, that you're persistent, you have hard work ethic. And so those are good things to show. Similarly, letters of recommendation. Maybe some of your professors, your teachers have gotten to know you really well. You spent time with them both in the classroom and through organizations. Maybe the professor who you had was also the supervisor for the Olympiad team that you guys maybe do, things like that. Those people are uniquely qualified to speak on your behalf because they've worked with you and worked closely with you. And so they can tell what kind of student you are, and they can also help the admissions team predict, engage, / measure what kind of student you will be in university. And so that's really important because in your essay, you're telling your own story. And so there's obviously naturally going to be a little bit of biasm in the essay because we're naturally biased and we want to put ourselves in a positive light. A letter of recommendation gives the admissions team a different perspective on what kind of student you are from the eyes of a different individual, not the candidate. And so that's equally as important because it shows the admissions team more to work with, and it lets them see, okay, well, they worked closely with this professor, and so this professor said that they really are a good student, that they were actively engaged, they listed what strengths they have, and things like that. And a tip here, one thing that you can do about letter of recommendations, which is really good, is if there's something that you aren't able to really highlight or include in your own application, but a letter of recommendation can help include whatever that thing is, do it. Letter of recommendations are a great way to add additional information that you're not able to add in yourself. especially when it's coming from an individual who has already had to evaluate you academically. And so they're qualified to speak to those types of things. So I saw really quickly, there was a question about how do they check volunteering? Certificates, yes. But frankly, if I'm being honest from my time, I know that a lot of times, not that they just take your word for it, because a lot of times they can tell if something has been just like falsely made. So if I say that I was spending like 50 hours every day, like day and night at like the nursing home, I mean, they're going to wonder, where did I have that much time? But for most of the volunteer opportunities that you do, you just have to list them. And a lot of times if they want to check, not really, they can either check, yes, as someone mentioned, through certificates, but the best way that they check, and maybe the most effective way, is through the supervisor. So when you're volunteering, you obviously usually have somebody who is a supervisor for you, or who is helping work with you, or who is kind of overseeing the program. And so supervisors are a great way for them to kind of reaffirm or kind of endorse all of that and add credibility to it. But a lot of times, it's really rare, I feel like, for a lot of admissions teams to get back to you and say, okay, we need to verify that you did this volunteering. Because most oftentimes the admissions teams would like to believe that a lot of the students are being honest. And if they did a volunteering opportunity, then they did it. And I think that'll show through the application, because they'll be able to see, okay, if this student mentions this, do they demonstrate the qualities that would have been required in such a volunteering role? But yeah, there's no really formal way that they check, but if they did, I would assume they would do it through certificates or through reaching out to a supervisor. So that's just something to look at. But that makes up basically the qualitative requirements. I don't know if you guys have any questions specifically on any of the specific items, but we will look at, actually here in a second, we're going to do some like scenarios, hopefully to help you guys have a better understanding of what this looks like in reality. These two different types of categories, so the technical and qualitative requirements. What I did here and what I want you guys to do is I'm going to read this out loud. You guys can also read it to yourself, so you don't have to listen to my annoying voice all the time. I have 3 examples of student scenarios. And so each of these would technically be theoretically current high school students at different times in high school. So I want you guys to, after reading this, to tell me, what do you think this student's chances are of getting into whatever program that they're applying to? What are some strengths of their application? What are some areas of improvement / maybe weaknesses? And overall, how would you probably evaluate just the application or the type of student? So for example 1, I'm going to go ahead. You are in your senior year of high school. So that means your 4th year, your final year. You constantly perform in the top 5% of your class. So you're getting amazing grades, you're doing well. And thanks to your strong work ethic and determination to go to each professor's tutoring session. So you're involved, your professors know you, you're constantly doing what is being asked of you. All of your professors know you very well, which is good, I guess, and recognize your academic performance. However, since your number 1 priority is your coursework, you do not have much time to get involved outside of class due to the time you spend studying. I see this applicant. The first things that stand out to me are if we look at it in the 2 types of categories. First, in the technical side. So it says top 5%. So that's really good. It sounds like he performs really well academically. I would assume if he's in top 5%, he probably has a good, strong test score as well. So his percentile, his rank, everything like that is probably good. He meets whatever requirements, and he probably has competitive grades overall. However, when we look at the qualitative side, as someone mentioned, there isn't really much on the qualitative side. So this student really concentrated all of their efforts just on their classwork, and that's it. So yes, they have top grades, but they didn't really show what kind of student or what kind of person or what they're interested about outside of the classroom. And that's important to do. So those are probably some areas of weakness, are more of the qualitative side. This student could definitely improve their application by working on some things on the qualitative side. So like I said, the other thing is here, they're in their senior year. So what can they do if they're in their final year? My recommendation is not to try to do 1,000 things your last year, but instead maybe choose 1, maybe 2, but I think 1 is okay, to really devote your last final year to while you're writing these applications. Because then you can mention that to say that you've had the time recently to get more involved and you've been doing this whatever activity, or you hold a leadership role in this organization that you're really passionate about. And then that gives you some more credibility on the qualitative side, and it also lets the admissions team know what kind of student you are outside of the technical side. And they want to know that. And so that's really good for them to know. So overall, I would say if I gave this student a ranking, I would say probably 7 out of 10. The technical side is obviously really effective, will help them meet the minimum, but they might not get necessarily into the top program of their choice because they are lacking in the qualitative side. And so an admissions team might deem them not a well-rounded student. All right, so example 2 is you are a third-year high school student, what we call a junior, looking to major in international relations in the future at university. You are very action-driven and are involved in several organizations on campus. Your grades constantly place in the top 15%. You dedicate a considerable amount of time to volunteering at a local food bank, and you run the Human Rights Club at your university. Your entrance exam scores, so your SAT or SAT, are average. So this is kind of the exact opposite candidate, more or less. But here, this person is very involved and very active, and that's good because that shows that they have initiative and that they are action-driven. And that is something that universities do want to see. They want to see, again, as I mentioned, I can't stress it enough, who you are outside of the classroom. And this person, by working in a human rights club, by volunteering at the local food bank, it shows that he or she is compassionate, that they care about maybe human rights. That's something that they want to do, and maybe that's what their future career will be related to. But on the technical side, if we look, it said top 15%. Top 15% is still pretty good. That's pretty, I would say that's still competitive. And that's really, this person definitely has a lot of options still. And so I think that this is actually a pretty well-balanced applicant, even though it seems like they might lack a little bit on the technical side because they have average SAT scores and 15%. But I think that actually they're pretty well-balanced. And so that is something to realize here is that top 15% helps. Your GPA can help balance out an average entrance exam score and stuff like that. Because here I said that they have an average score. And so if it's just average, but they have a good ranking and good grades, maybe they're just not good at taking tests. And so the admissions team will notice that, and those things can balance each other out. So that's something to take into account. So the last example, you are a freshman in high school, so it's your first year, and you are still not sure where your academic interests lie. So you don't really know what you're passionate about. Again, it's your first year, so nobody really expects you to know just yet. You don't know what to dedicate your time outside of academia to as well. Since you are still in your first year, your coursework is very general. As you are a first-year student, you do not have to worry about graduate entrance exams just yet, so you don't have to worry about the SAT because it's still really early. Here, there aren't really any weaknesses or strengths. A lot of times what you guys don't think about is a college counselor is a great resource for you, and even if it's your first year in high school. Why? Because they can tell you exactly what you should maybe try to get involved in and what are some different things that you can do. I will say the SAT, obviously it's important because it's the entrance exam, but don't kill yourself about preparing for it way too early. Be really reasonable about the time that you commit to it. And I mean, you don't need to take it 1,000 times just to get the one specific score that you think is perfect. I would say take it maybe 2-3 times and then go from there. But again, don't dedicate all your time to just one test, because college admissions teams do not just want to see that. Something you guys should think about is extracurriculars are really important, not just because you get to put them in your application, but because they help you guys specifically understand what your interests and passions are. So if I try out the French club my first year, but I realize, okay, actually I'm not so passionate about French or things related with French, well, okay, I didn't waste my time because now I know I can dedicate my time to something else. So extracurriculars are a great option for the student because for 2 reasons. A, it shows academic and extracurricular involvement, but 2, it helps the student better understand what kind of interests they have. Try some free online courses or ask a lot of people about their jobs. Exactly, that's really good too. If maybe somebody already knows, for example, my freshman year in high school, I knew I wanted to kind of go into the medical field. If you maybe want to interview different types of doctors, that's really good because then you can see what kind of doctor you'd want to be, or maybe what kind of area in business you'd want to go to. So interviewing professionals is also a really great way. You can ask them to send them an email, maybe set up a quick phone call. I like that idea as well. That's a really creative idea, and that's really good. Student can take APs and explore his or her interests. Yeah, exactly. Specific classes are also a great way for you guys to be able to understand what you're interested about. I would say that there really isn't one size fits all solution to how to approach your application. An application, just like you all, is complex, it's diverse, it's different, and that is a good thing. And so that's something for you guys all to understand is each of your applications should be your specific story. And that's what I want you guys to think about this is the most important advice I can give you is, does your application tell your story? If you gave me your application right now and I read it, and then I tried to tell your story back to you, would I be able to tell your story in my, like after reading your application really well or not? And if not, then maybe there's some things that you need to fix because it needs to tell your story really well. And that's something that you guys need to think about. And that's a great way for you guys to have people review your application. Have someone who doesn't know much about you read it and see what they can say about you. That's a great way for them to understand, okay, yeah, this person effectively did their job, and for you to understand if your application is strong or not. Really, in the end, I know maybe this is not the answer you wanted, but maybe it's an answer you expected. What matters most is neither. I mean, for technical requirements, I think one thing you should know is obviously schools have minimum requirements for the technical side, but they will never tell you what like score is for sure going to get you in. Instead, if your score is like super, super low, obviously then you might need to take the test again or try some other things. But for the most part, if you have average or really competitive scores, then really you don't have to only worry about the technical side. Your qualitative side will be just as important because it can help push your application even higher. Because the admissions team really just want applicants who are well-rounded and who are able to do a variety of different things.